The Qarillian Hegemony had built their entire military philosophy around a single unshakable principle: bigger was always better. It was a doctrine that had served them well across 4 centuries of galactic expansion, turning their navy into a collection of increasingly absurd space monuments dedicated to the art of cosmic intimidation. Their latest flagship, the Void Sovereign, stretched 22 magnificent kilometers from bow to stern, a testament to their belief that subtle diplomacy was for species lacking proper engineering capabilities. Admiral Crox Vanu stood in the cathedral-like command center of his beloved dreadnought, his 6 arms spread wide in a gesture that his species considered deeply impressive, but which most other races found vaguely ridiculous. His crystalline carapace gleamed under the bridge's ceremonial lighting, each facet carefully polished to reflect his rank and, more importantly, his ship's dimensions. The Qarillians measured everything by size, from their vassals to their egos, and Crox Vanu possessed both in quantities that defied reasonable limits. Today promised to be particularly satisfying. The humans, those bipedal mammals who had somehow stumbled into galactic society despite lacking any obvious qualifications, had finally attracted enough attention to warrant a proper educational demonstration. Earth's admission to the galactic community had been met with the sort of polite bewilderment typically reserved for watching someone try to eat soup with a fork. Their technology was primitive, their understanding of proper naval protocol non-existent, and their ships were reportedly small enough to fit inside a Qarillian hangar bay. The challenge had been issued with all appropriate ceremony. The Qarillian Hegemony, in their infinite wisdom and generosity, would provide humanity with a comprehensive lesson in naval superiority. It would be a teaching moment, really, designed to help these newcomers understand their proper place in the cosmic hierarchy. Crox Vanu had volunteered for this duty, partly out of civic responsibility, and partly because crushing the hopes of upstart species was his favorite hobby. 63 Qarillian dreadnoughts had assembled in the Proxima Centauri neutral zone, arranged in what military historians would later describe as the most unnecessarily dramatic formation in recorded galactic history. Each vessel was a masterpiece of intimidating architecture, bristling with weapons arrays that could reduce planets to component particles and engine systems that could be seen from neighboring star systems. The assembled fleet represented enough firepower to sterilize several solar systems, a fact that Crox Vanu found deeply comforting. The humans would take one look at this display of organized destruction and immediately understand the futility of their pretensions to military relevance. Word of the demonstration had spread throughout the galaxy with the speed that only truly embarrassing spectacles could achieve. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered aboard various observation platforms, eager to witness what promised to be the most one-sided naval comparison in recent memory. The betting pools had reached astronomical proportions, with odds heavily favoring the humans either surrendering immediately or simply failing to show up out of pure shame. "Admiral," reported his communications officer, a young Qarillian whose carapace still bore the dull finish of inexperience, "we're receiving diplomatic messages from 17 different species expressing sympathy for the humans' inevitable humiliation." Crox Vanu's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "How thoughtful of them. Have we received any response from Earth regarding their participation in today's lesson?" "Yes, sir. They've confirmed that their entire available fleet will participate in the demonstration." "Their entire fleet?" Crox Vanu's crystalline features brightened with amusement. "How many ships are we expecting?" "The humans haven't specified numbers, sir. They've only stated that they're mobilizing everything they can reasonably deploy for a peaceful demonstration." This was even better than Crox Vanu had hoped. The humans were apparently so desperate to maintain some semblance of dignity that they were planning to throw every vessel they possessed into this hopeless confrontation. It would be like watching children try to intimidate adults with toy weapons, except that children were entire civilizations, and the toys were supposedly functional starships. Intercepted human communications had been providing endless entertainment for the past several hours. Their military channels buzzed with what sounded like desperate attempts to coordinate their massive response to the Qarillian challenge. Orders flew back and forth about scrambling everything available and deploying maximum deterrent capability. The poor primitives were apparently throwing their entire civilization's resources into this doomed endeavor. Ambassador Thex9 of the Centaurian Trade Federation had sent a particularly thoughtful message expressing regret that humanity's brief membership in galactic society would likely end so ignominiously. The Andromedan Collective had offered to provide grief counselors for human survivors. Even the usually diplomatic Rigelians had placed substantial bets on the entertainment value of the coming spectacle. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're detecting hyperspace signatures. The human fleet is arriving." Crox Vanu straightened all 6 arms in anticipation. This moment would define humanity's future relationship with the rest of the galaxy. After today, no species would question Qarillian supremacy, and the humans would understand their proper role as a minor, decorative addition to galactic civilization. Space rippled, and a single vessel dropped out of hyperspace with the casual precision of someone parking in an empty lot. The UES Nightfall materialized before the assembled Qarillian fleet, like a lone minnow facing a school of space whales. At barely 6 kilometers in length, it looked less like a warship and more like an oversight, a clerical error that had somehow achieved independent existence. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to possess physical weight. "Sir," the communications officer whispered, his voice carrying the sort of confusion typically reserved for mathematical impossibilities, "that appears to be their entire fleet." Crox Vanu stared at his displays, waiting for additional signatures that never materialized. Surely the humans hadn't sent a single ship to face 63 dreadnoughts? Even the most optimistic interpretation of courage had practical limits, and this seemed to exceed them by several orders of magnitude. On the various observation platforms, alien diplomats were experiencing a collective moment of cognitive dissonance. The anticipated spectacle of human naval might had turned into what appeared to be an elaborate suicide attempt. Several species began composing eulogies out of sheer humanitarian obligation. "Qarillian fleet," came a voice over the communication channels, speaking with the sort of casual confidence typically associated with people ordering coffee rather than facing overwhelming military odds. "This is Commander Dmitry Kowalski of the United Earth ship Nightfall. I understand you wanted to compare naval capabilities." Crox Vanu activated his response systems, preparing to deliver a speech about the importance of understanding one's limitations when facing superior civilizations. Instead, he found himself momentarily speechless. The human sounded genuinely cheerful, as if this were some sort of pleasant social occasion, rather than a demonstration of inevitable defeat. "Commander Kowalski," Crox Vanu finally managed, "you appear to be significantly outnumbered. Perhaps your species would prefer to acknowledge Qarillian naval superiority without requiring a formal demonstration." "Oh, the demonstration sounds fascinating," Kowalski replied, and there was definitely enthusiasm in his voice. "We're always interested in observing different approaches to fleet operations, though I should probably ask about the ground rules. Are we doing a size comparison, weapons demonstration, or tactical maneuvering exercise?" The alien observers leaned forward in their seats. This human was either displaying admirable courage in the face of certain destruction, or had completely lost touch with reality. Either possibility promised excellent entertainment value. Crox Vanu decided to make this educational. "We shall begin with a formal measurement ceremony, Commander. I believe you'll find the comparison illuminating." "An excellent idea," Kowalski agreed. "Fair warning though, I'll need to verify structural integrity standards. We wouldn't want any accidents during the demonstration." The two fleets moved into position for the measuring ceremony, a ritual that had become traditional whenever the Qarillians wanted to make a point about relative capabilities. The 63 dreadnoughts arranged themselves in a perfect line, each vessel a monument to the principle that impressive size translated directly into tactical advantage. The Nightfall took its position at the end of the formation, looking like a period at the end of a very long, very threatening sentence. The comparison was so absurd that several alien observers began questioning whether this was actually an elaborate practical joke being played by some unknown comedian with access to military-grade special effects. "As you can observe," Crox Vanu announced over the general communication frequency, The Qarillian Hegemony operates vessels of appropriate scale for serious military operations. The Void Sovereign alone masses more than your entire ship, several hundred times over. Impressive construction, Kowalski acknowledged. That's a lot of ship. How do you handle the structural stress at those dimensions? The materials engineering alone must be fascinating. Prox Vanu paused, slightly thrown by the human's apparent genuine interest in technical specifications rather than obvious intimidation. Our crystalline hull matrices are the most advanced in known space, capable of withstanding incredible force loadings while maintaining structural integrity. Crystalline hulls, Kowalski mused. Interesting choice. How do they perform under gravitational stress? Just curious about the engineering trade-offs. Gravitational stress? Prox Vanu's mandibles clicked in confusion. Commander, are you planning to drag our ships into a stellar gravity well? Because that would seem unnecessarily complicated for a naval demonstration. Oh no, nothing that dramatic, Kowalski assured him. I'm just interested in understanding the design philosophy, different approaches to the same basic challenges, you know? The alien diplomatic corps was beginning to suspect that something unusual was developing. The human commander's questions suggested either a concerning level of technical sophistication or a fascinating detachment from his impending doom. Ambassador Thex9 began revising his estimates of how this demonstration might conclude. Perhaps, Prox Vanu suggested, we should proceed to the weapons demonstration. I believe you'll find it enlightening. Sounds perfect, Kowalski replied. Same target area for both fleets? The Qarillians had prepared an asteroid field for target practice, a convenient collection of space rocks that would serve as excellent demonstration material. Prox Vanu's fleet moved into attack formation, with the fluid precision of centuries of practice, their weapons systems charging with building harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensions. When they fired, the display was everything the Qarillians had hoped for. Plasma cannons capable of boiling oceans lanced across space, each beam carrying enough energy to power small civilizations. Missile salvos that could crack continental plates streaked toward their targets with perfect accuracy. The asteroids didn't simply explode, they underwent complete molecular dissolution, transforming from solid matter into expanding clouds of component atoms. The alien observers broke into appreciative applause. This was why the Qarillian hegemony commanded respect throughout the galaxy. This was the sort of raw, destructive capability that convinced younger species to mind their manners and pay their tribute on time. Excellent demonstration, Kowalski commented over the communication channels. Very thorough. Traditional plasma-based systems with kinetic backup. Classic approach, well executed. Prox Vanu felt a surge of pride at the professional appreciation. Thank you, Commander. Perhaps now you understand the scale of power we're discussing. Absolutely, Kowalski agreed. Mind if we try the same target area? I'd like to demonstrate our standard patrol protocols for comparison. Your standard patrol protocols? Prox Vanu's crystalline features expressed confusion. Commander, you're operating a single ship against an entire fleet. What sort of protocols could possibly be relevant? Nothing too dramatic, Kowalski assured him. Just our usual approach to area clearance. We'll keep collateral damage to absolute minimum, of course. The nightfall approached the devastated target zone with movements so casual they seemed almost bored. The ship's weapon systems came online, but the energy signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Instead of the familiar patterns of plasma or particle weapons, the readings showed something that made instruments across the observation platforms begin displaying error messages. "What are they powering up?" whispered Minister Krall of the Andromedan Collective, her tentacles rigid with sudden anxiety. The answer came in the form of devastation so complete that it required entirely new vocabulary to describe adequately. The Nightfall fired once, deploying what Commander Kowalski casually described as experimental gravitational manipulation technology. A focused beam of modified space-time struck the center of the target area, and what happened next would be studied by physics departments for the next several centuries. Matter didn't explode or vaporize. It was consumed by artificially generated micro-singularities that appeared and vanished with surgical precision, each one carefully calibrated to eliminate specific targets while leaving the surrounding space completely undisturbed. The remaining asteroids simply ceased to exist, pulled into gravitational anomalies that compressed them beyond the threshold of physical reality before dissolving back into normal space-time. The entire demonstration lasted exactly 17 seconds and left behind a region of space so perfectly empty that it seemed to bend light around its edges. The silence that followed was the kind typically reserved for moments when fundamental assumptions about reality require immediate revision. Gravitational manipulation, Kalski explained conversationally, as if he were discussing gardening techniques. We find it more precise than traditional energy weapons, less mess, more accurate targeting, and the power requirements are actually quite reasonable once you solve the containment mathematics. Admiral Crox-Vanu stared at his sensor displays, trying to process readings that suggested his instruments had either malfunctioned catastrophically or witnessed something that redefined the concept of military technology. The energy output from that single weapon's discharge had briefly registered as a stellar mass event, compressed into a space smaller than his flagship's hangar bay. "Commander," he managed, his voice carrying none of its earlier confidence, "that was comprehensive. However, you're still operating a single vessel against our entire fleet." "True," Kowalski acknowledged, "though I should probably mention that the Nightfall is classified as a light reconnaissance frigate in our naval organization. We thought bringing one of our actual battleships might seem excessive for a friendly demonstration." The observation platforms erupted in barely controlled panic. Diplomatic communication devices were activated across multiple species simultaneously, priority messages were dispatched to dozens of different military commands, and at least 6 different ambassadors were attempting to establish immediate trade agreements with Earth. Minister Kroll's tentacles had gone completely rigid. "Did he say light reconnaissance frigate?" "Light reconnaissance," Ambassador Thex-9 confirmed, his voice hollow with dawning comprehension. "That means they have actual warships." "Much larger ones," Kalski added helpfully, apparently monitoring their communications. "Our dreadnoughts are 47 kilometers long and carry enough gravitational manipulation systems to create temporary stellar phenomena. We also have specialized planetary defense platforms that can generate stable wormholes for tactical purposes. The Nightfall represents our most basic patrol capability." Admiral Crox-Vanu felt his worldview collapsing with the structural integrity of a crystalline hull under gravitational stress. Everything the Qarillian Hegemony believed about naval superiority, everything their civilization had built around the principle of size-based intimidation, had just been revealed as elaborate self-deception. "How many ships does Earth operate?" he asked, though he wasn't certain he wanted to hear the answer. "Currently, 96 vessels in the dreadnought class, about 300 destroyers and cruisers, and roughly 1,200 patrol and reconnaissance ships like the Nightfall, plus our defensive installations, but those are technically not ships." The numbers hit the assembled observers like gravitational waves from a collapsing star. The humans, those supposedly primitive newcomers who had been dismissed as barely evolved mammals, possessed a fleet that could challenge the combined military forces of half the galaxy. "But your civilization," Minister Qual protested weakly. "Your technology seemed so basic when you applied for membership. Your ships were described as primitive chemical rockets, barely capable of interplanetary travel." "Oh, those," Kowalski replied with obvious amusement. "Those were our civilian transport systems. We've kept our actual military technology classified during the membership application process." "No, didn't want to seem intimidating while we were learning galactic diplomatic protocols." "How long have you possessed these capabilities?" Ambassador Thex-9 asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone discovering they had been fundamentally wrong about basic reality. "About 3 centuries, give or take. We started developing gravitational manipulation technology around the same time we figured out faster-than-light travel. It seemed like a natural progression once we understood the underlying physics. The realization hit the diplomatic community like a weaponized singularity. Humanity hadn't been struggling to catch up with galactic civilization. They had been politely waiting for everyone else to notice they had already surpassed it. The condescending attitudes, the dismissive assumptions, the casual belief in human inferiority, all of it had been based on completely inaccurate intelligence. "The size of your ships," Croxvanu whispered, trying to understand where his calculations had gone so catastrophically wrong. "We assumed smaller vessels meant inferior capability." "Understandable mistake," Kowalski replied diplomatically. "Different engineering philosophies, I suppose. We found that efficiency matters more than raw size. When you can manipulate gravity directly, you don't need massive hulls to carry traditional weapons systems. A small ship with the right technology can accomplish more than a large ship with conventional equipment." The Qarillian admiral stared at his magnificent flagship, which had seemed so impressive a few hours ago, and now felt like an elaborate monument to engineering inefficiency. 63 dreadnoughts, each one a masterpiece of intimidating construction, and they had just been rendered obsolete by a single patrol frigate that could create artificial black holes as easily as firing conventional weapons. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we could discuss more cooperative approaches to galactic security." "Excellent suggestion," Kowalski agreed. "Earth is very interested in establishing mutual defense partnerships. We believe strongly in collective security. Everyone benefits when threats are addressed through coordinated action rather than competitive intimidation." The assembled alien observers began frantically composing messages to their respective governments. Defense treaties that had seemed unnecessary suddenly appeared to be matters of survival. Trade agreements that had been dismissed as jokes now looked like urgent economic priorities. As the Qarillian fleet began its dignified but hasty retreat, Admiral Croxvanu reflected on the morning's events with the sort of philosophical detachment that comes from having one's entire belief system surgically dismantled. He had come to demonstrate Qarillian superiority through superior size and conventional firepower. Instead, he had learned that true military superiority came from understanding physics well enough to make the universe work for you rather than against you. The humans, those supposedly primitive mammals, had just redefined galactic military doctrine with a casual demonstration and a polite conversation. They had been underestimated so completely that the error would be studied in intelligence academies for generations. Commander Dmitry Kowalski watched the alien fleet depart and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The demonstration had achieved its intended goals. Earth's military capabilities were now clearly understood, their position in galactic politics was secure, and future diplomatic negotiations would proceed with appropriate mutual respect. As for the aliens who had assumed their battleships would wow humanity, well, they had certainly been impressed by what they saw, just not in the way they had originally planned. The nightfall set course for home, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again make assumptions about human military technology based on ship size or apparent technological simplicity. After all, when your reconnaissance frigates carry gravitational manipulation weapons, people tend to be extremely polite about asking what your actual battleships might be capable of doing. And really, wasn't that exactly how interstellar diplomacy should work? Through mutual respect, careful communication, and the subtle but unmistakable understanding that underestimating your neighbors could result in very embarrassing educational experiences. Size, as it turned out, really didn't matter when you understood how to make space-time itself do the heavy lifting.